Chapter 904. In fact, Enchanting had already told Xiao Ziqing about this. Sure. Hearing this, Xiao Ziqing smiled and nodded. There are still 3 to 4 months until the new year. It's still not too late to start preparing for the wedding. Will I be able to hold a grandchild next year? Enchanting lowered her head and looked at Ming shyly. Xiao Ziqing smiled even more happily and teased, "This girl is actually shy. What's there to be shy about? It's settled then. I'll ask someone to check the date tomorrow." "What's the hurry?" Ming put down the bowl. "I've just been planning an overseas investment project. I'm very busy recently. I'm afraid I don't have that much time to do this." "It doesn't matter." Enchanting smiled brightly. "I know you're busy. Just leave it to me. It just so happens that my brother has nothing to do. I've already asked him to come over and help." "Your brother?" "Yes, you've also met him, Shenjilia." Shenjilia was Shenluo, Anne's younger brother. He was also a doctor, but he majored in psychology. "Oh." Ming responded and put down his chopsticks. Looking at his mother and Enchanting's happy faces in front of him, he couldn't express his annoyance. "I don't plan to get married so early, Manting. My career is still on the rise. As you can see, wait for me for a while." "Oh Ming, I can't wait anymore. Do you want me to die next year? I've waited for you for 4 years, and you still want me to wait? You're so selfish." Enchanting pouted and looked like she was about to cry. Seeing this, Xiao Ziqing was also a little angry at Ming's attitude. She said, "The best time of a girl has been wasted by you. How can you be like this? You're going to make me die of anger. Look at yourself. You're already 31 years old. Li Xiqing's twins are running around everywhere. The last time I came over, you called me grandma. How can you say that your career is on the rise? You're so useless." "Mom." Ming felt a little headache. Xiao Ziqing directly interrupted Ming's words. "Anyway, don't worry about it. Go and do your own things. Leave the wedding to me and Manting. We must get married within this year." Enchanting held Xiao Ziqing's arm and said emotionally, "Auntie." Xiao Ziqing patted Enchanting's arm and said, "Manting, don't worry. I'm indebted to the Shen family. I won't let you down no matter what." Enchanting was delighted to hear this. She sniffed and nodded in satisfaction. Ming didn't say anything. He stood up, picked up the pack of cigarettes, and walked out. At that moment, Ming's father, Huijin, walked in. He looked travel-worn. Xiao Ziqing was pleasantly surprised to see Huijin. "You're back. Doesn't it mean that he'll come back tomorrow?" Huijin was handsome. Although he was already in his 50s, he still looked like a man in his 30s or 40s. Huijin's expression softened when he heard Xiao Ziqing's words. He walked over and said, "I heard that Manting is here, so I ended it early." "What are you talking about? Why are you so happy?" "Let's talk about our marriage," Enchanting said with a bright smile. When Huijin heard that, he looked at Ming in surprise and said, "Son, you've finally come to your senses. You know that you can't drag on at your age?" Chapter 905. Are you full? You only ate a little? Xiao Ziqing said from behind, but Ming didn't pay any more attention to her. He walked straight outside. It wasn't just Enchanting. Even Mr. and Mrs. O could see Ming's displeasure. Enchanting felt a little awkward. She looked at Xiao Ziqing and asked, "Auntie, is it good for us to force him like this?" Xiao Ziqing looked disapproving and said, "It's not right for you to think that way. Back then, when Lao married me, he was also very unwilling. Later on, he still doted on me like a treasure. Let me tell you, men have to be forced. If you don't force him, he won't be able to do anything." Enchanting suddenly felt relieved. She nodded and smiled brightly. "That's what my grandmother told me. No matter how playful a man is, he'll learn after marriage. What's more, Oh Ming is such a responsible man. Hearing Shen Manting praise her son, Xiao Ziqing was equally happy. Soon, the two of them began to discuss the matter of marriage. Oh Ming was a little annoyed as he walked outside. After lighting a cigarette, he dialed the number to the Pharmaceutical Research Institute that he had privately built. He asked about the progress, and they said a lot, but in the end, there was still no result. Oh Ming was already in a bad mood, but it suddenly became even worse. He regretted it. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have brought Yu Lily back from the capital at this critical juncture. Now that the matter had not been resolved, and Yu Lily was so sensitive, if she sensed that something was wrong, she would definitely overthink it. What should I do? Oh Ming took a deep drag on his cigarette. He felt a splitting headache. He took his car keys and walked toward his car. Before he could put the keys in, he heard Oh Huijin call out, "Xiao Oh." When Oh Ming heard that, he turned his head. Oh Huijin stood at the door and looked at him meaningfully. A pair of slightly wrinkled peach blossom eyes looked in his direction and said, "Let's talk." Oh Ming didn't go home, so Yu Lily was in a very bad mood. After dinner, Yu Lily was no longer in the mood to paint. She lay on the bed, her mind full of random thoughts. Holding her phone, she wanted to call Oh Ming, but she didn't dare do it. What if he found her annoying? What should she do? With her current status, what right did she have to ask him where he went and who he was with? Yu Lily was very clear, but at the same time, she felt a strong sense of loss. The gap between them was still too big. Yu Lily was extremely upset. After rolling on the bed for a while, she went to take a shower and then went to the study, turning on the computer to draw. When it was about 11 o'clock, Oh Ming still hadn't come back. Yu Lily's heart felt empty. She picked up the phone and dialed Oh Ming. The call was quickly answered, and Oh Ming's voice came through. "You're not asleep yet?" His gentle question made Yu Lily feel relieved. She pouted and said, "I can't sleep if you don't come back." "Where are you?" Oh Ming was silent for a moment. After a long time, he said, "I'm not going back tonight." Chapter 906. "Oh," Yu Lily asked, "at your mother's place?" "Yes." "Remember to sleep early and remember to take your medicine," Oh Ming replied calmly. Yu Lily's chest tightened, and she felt indescribably depressed. However, she couldn't say anything. After a moment of silence, she said, "Got it. Go to work. Good night." "Good night." After hanging up the phone, the air was dead silent. Her mood seemed to be hollowed out by his words, and it was terrible. Yu Lily looked at the ceiling for a long time, then threw the phone away, covered the top of her head with the quilt, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep all night. There was still a lot of food left from last night's dinner. Yu Lily didn't have extra money, so she put it away. She heated it in the microwave and ate some. Her eyes were a little painful, but she couldn't fall asleep. Yu Lily put on a loose sportswear and went out for a run. The apartment where Oh Ming lived was located in the prosperous area of the city, and it was also a very famous area for the rich. There were many parks and squares. Yu Lily trotted all the way, and after 2 laps, it was already dawn. When she returned to the apartment, it was already after 9 o'clock. She pressed the elevator button, and she was a little out of breath. Suddenly there was the sound of a suitcase being pulled, but Yu Lily didn't care. However, there was a sudden exclamation behind her, and it seemed to be a little surprise. It was a man's voice, shouting, "It's you?" Yu Lily didn't know whether it was an illusion or something, but she felt a little familiar. Turning her head, she saw a young man who looked about 25 or 26 years old standing not far behind her. He was wearing a pink suit, pulling a suitcase, and looked very well equipped. He had a fashionable hairstyle and a carefully groomed face. At first glance, she knew he was a very particular person. However, the man's smile was bright, and he was full of sunshine and cheerful appearance. At this moment, he was looking at Yu Lily with surprise, pointing at her, and said slowly, "It's really you. Damn, I was cheated by you last time." You little liar. Yu Lily looked at the man, and the familiar feeling came. It seems. I saw him when I was a bartender. Could it be that he had been deceived by her? Yu Lily immediately turned her face away and pretended to be calm as she said, "You must have mistaken me for someone else. I don't know you. How is that possible? We must have met before. You are that, who was that? What's your name? Li Xiaoyu? Right, it must be you." Shenjilia looked at her with certainty and said, "I'm very sure, but Li Xiaoyu is definitely your pseudonym. What's your real name?" Yu Lily was a little annoyed. She turned her head and scolded, "Are you crazy? I don't know you. TSK, I still have that 1982 Lafite." Shenjilia's interest was piqued and he said, "I don't have any intention of getting even with you. I just want to be friends and get to know you better. My name is Shenjilia, and I'm 26 years old. I just moved here today. Do you live here?" Yu Lily didn't want to leave him behind. When the elevator arrived, she immediately walked in. Shenjilia followed her in and pressed the elevator button. It was the 20th floor. Chapter 907. Yu Lily was a little impatient. She looked at him with annoyance and said, "Why are you so talkative?" Shenjilia immediately shut up. Yu Lily glared at him and pressed the elevator button for the 26th floor. Shenjilia didn't say another word. He secretly memorized the floor number. When the elevator stopped on the 20th floor, Shenjilia pulled his suitcase and walked out. His smile was as bright as the sun. He looked like a handsome, sunny young man who had just walked out of a comic. "I'll move first. I'll come to play with you later." Yu Lily didn't want to pay attention to him at all. After pressing the button to close the elevator door, she pressed the button for the 26th floor to cancel. Then, she pressed the button for the 28th floor and went up. As soon as she went up, Yu Lily felt very sleepy. She changed her clothes, hugged the quilt, and fell asleep. He slept until the middle of the night. When she woke up, Oh Ming was already sleeping beside her. He was only wearing a bathrobe. His breathing was even, and his arm was on her waist. It was a familiar and natural action, but at this moment, Yu Lily felt a lump in her throat, and she almost couldn't hold back her tears. Leaning into his arms, Yu Lily greedily and carefully breathed, smelling his scent, and closed her eyes. The next day, Monday, Yu Lily was directly sent to the front desk and became a temporary receptionist. However, she stayed there for 3 days. On the 4th day, Yu Lily finally couldn't help it. She went to the chief editor's office and knocked on the door. "Come in." After Yu Lily went in, the chief editor just glanced at her, then lowered her head and said, "What's the matter?" "Chief Editor Zhou, when I came here, I was interviewed for the position of an editorial assistant, not a receptionist. Why did you ask me to go to the front desk?" Chief Editor Zhou pushed her glasses and said matter-of-factly, "You are a newcomer, so you should help each other. The front desk is temporarily short of staff, so I just asked you to fill in for a few days. A new receptionist will come tomorrow, and you can go back to the office to work tomorrow." This explanation was a bit far-fetched. Shan Yu was still a newcomer. Why did Yu Lily work at the front desk instead of Shan Yu? Yu Lily was not very convinced, but when she heard this, she had nothing to say. The next day, when Yu Lily went to work again, she went straight to the office to wait for her shift instead of going to the front desk. Ziyu saw her and said, "Aren't you supposed to be working at the front desk? Why are you still here?" "The chief editor said that I can come back to work here. There will be a new receptionist coming today." Ziyu nodded. "If that's the case, go through this stack." "All right." Yu Lily started working diligently. After about an hour, the chief editor walked into the office. She was a little angry and shouted, "Where's Yu Lily? Where is Yu Lily?" She looked up and raised her hand. "I'm here. Don't you know that there's no one at the front desk? The delivery man is throwing a tantrum over there. Go and collect the package." Yu Lily felt puzzled and said, "Chief Editor Zhou, what does the delivery man's anger have to do with me?" I'm not the receptionist, am I? When editor-in-chief Zhou heard this, she was a little angry and said, "Didn't I tell you to be the receptionist first? You are so disobedient. How can I use you?" Chapter 908. Yu Lily heard the implication and was a little annoyed. Was there anything wrong with what she said? Or was the editor-in-chief just not happy with me and wanted to fire me? But even if she was angry, Yu Lily's job was not easy. Yu Lily could still bear such a degree of targeting. She explained patiently, "Editor-in-chief, I heard you say yesterday that I could go back to the office to work today, so I came back directly. If you had told me that I couldn't come back and had to work at the front desk, I wouldn't have come back to the office." Editor-in-chief Zhou was a little angry and sneered, "Do you mean to blame me? Is it my fault?" "No, I just said that, aren't you blaming me?" "Well, I didn't make it clear. This time it's my fault. Go to the front desk." After that, editor-in-chief Zhou turned and left. Yu Lily was a little embarrassed, and many colleagues looked over. Especially Shan Yu, when she looked over, there was sympathy in her eyes. Yu Lily endured the grievance in her heart and returned to the front desk. After collecting all the packages, she sat at the front desk and reviewed the contracts. She didn't know how long she had been alone. After a while, Yi Qianqian handed a cup of coffee to Yu Lily and said, "Take a break and have a cup of coffee." Yu Lily looked at Yi Qianqian gratefully and thanked her sincerely, "Thank you." Yi Qianqian smiled. After looking around, she went to the front desk and sat with Yu Lily. She whispered, "There was a front desk here, and you should have seen it once. It was the first day you came to work." She was still working, but suddenly the editor-in-chief asked her to go home. The next day, she asked you to be the front desk and assistant. Did you have a grudge with editor-in-chief Zhou before? Yu Lily had expected that editor-in-chief Zhou was deliberately targeting her, but she still felt a little wronged when she heard it from her colleagues. After thinking about it carefully, Yu Lily felt that there should be no reason for her to offend the editor-in-chief. Shaking her head, Yu Lily looked at Yi Qianqian and asked, "How long have you been working here?" "Me? It's been more than 3 months." Yi Qianqian took a sip of coffee and smiled. She said, "Eurasian Comics is a new website. It's only been open for less than 3 months, but from the looks of it, it has a promising future ahead of it. But if you work at the front desk, you won't have much of a future. You have to strive to become an assistant editor as soon as possible so that you can slowly learn things." How could Yu Lily not understand this? But at the moment, editor-in-chief Zhou was their boss. Above editor-in-chief Zhou, there was a chief editor. However, the chief editor did not come here often. It was said that he would only come here once or twice. If Yu Lily hadn't guessed wrong, the person who had spoken to editor-in-chief Zhou last time and made editor-in-chief Zhou act like a lackey should be the editor-in-chief of Eurasian Comics. Thinking of that woman, Yu Lily immediately remembered the last time she and editor-in-chief Zhou looked at her and talked. Is it because of that woman that editor-in-chief Zhou is targeting me? But when did she offend her? Yu Lily frowned and thought for a long time, but she couldn't figure out the reason. Speak of the devil. Yu Lily inadvertently looked up and saw the woman at a glance. It was the woman who had a pleasant conversation with editor-in-chief Zhou a few days ago. She was suspected to be the chief editor. Chapter 909. Enchanting walked over with a beautiful handbag. She was twirling a furry ball in her hand. It was a beautiful furry ball of bright red color. Yu Lily recognized it at a glance. This fur ball seemed to be the latest decoration of a luxury brand. It was made from the most beautiful part of the tail of the red fox. It was particularly precious. She had seen it in a magazine and liked it very much. Unfortunately, although Yu Lily liked it, she couldn't afford it. Seeing her coming over, Yi Qianqian felt a little familiar, so she nodded with a smile. However, Enchanting didn't even look at Yi Qianqian. She looked straight at Yu Lily and asked, "Is your chief editor Zhou here?" "Yes, in the office." "Let me call her for you." While Yu Lily was talking, she had already picked up the phone and called Chief Editor Zhou. Enchanting looked at her with a big smile and said, "Thank you. This is for you." She casually threw the fur ball into Lily's arms. Lily was stunned and looked at Enchanting. Enchanting winked at her and said, "I bought it casually, but it doesn't look good on me. I think you look beautiful in red, so I gave it to you." Lily couldn't believe it. When she was about to say something, Enchanting turned around and was about to go inside. "Wait." Lily stopped her and said, "This thing is very expensive." "Oh, I don't like it." "If you don't like it, you can give it to someone else. But I really think it suits you. You can hang it on your bag. It must be very beautiful." Enchanting waved at her and walked inside. Lily felt like she had seen a ghost. Is this for real? The editor-in-chief actually gave such a valuable thing to him just like that? She was too generous. Lily felt a little surprised. Looking at Enchanting's back, she shouted, "Thank you." Enchanting's back was facing her, and a triumphant smile flashed across her face. She waved her hand and walked into the room. Enchanting looked at the fur ball in Lily's hand and felt a little envious. She said, "That's nice. This thing seems very expensive." Lily really liked it. She held it in her hand and couldn't wait to hang it on her bag. The handbag was also a very beautiful bright red, and it complemented the fur ball very well. So beautiful. Enchanting liked it very much, but she still sighed and said, "That's great. I'm going to work now. You can continue reviewing the contract." Lily smiled and nodded. She raised her hand and said, "Thank you for the coffee." "You're welcome." After Enchanting left, Lily secretly felt that she might have been too narrow-minded. This fur ball was even more expensive than her salary, yet the chief editor had given it to her so casually. He probably wasn't targeting her on purpose, right? Lily looked at the fur ball and was in a good mood. After work, Lily returned home and was surprised to find that Ming was already home. Lily was carrying the groceries she had just bought and said, "Why are you back so early today?" "I haven't cooked yet." Ming sat in the living room, glanced at the groceries in her hand, and said, "Put them in the fridge. I ordered takeout." As he spoke, he stood up and walked toward Lily. Ming's long fingers were holding a cigarette, which was slowly emitting smoke. Lily looked at him and didn't care. She sorted the groceries and put them in the fridge. Before she finished, Ming had already hugged her waist. Ming gently exhaled the smoke in her ear. With a faint evil smile on his lips, he said, "Lily, how long have you lived here?" His voice was low. As he spoke, Ming held her waist with both hands and rubbed his head forward. He gently rubbed his cheek against her face, and the corners of his lips seemed to touch her from time to time. If it had been the usual Lily, she would definitely have raised her head to meet his touch. But at that moment, Lily felt a little uncomfortable. Lily looked sideways, kissed him gently on the lips, and said, "About 10 days?" Ming closed the refrigerator door and gently pressed her against the refrigerator door. With a slightly upturned voice, he said, "It's 11 days. In a few days, it will be half a month." Lily had recently gained some weight. Compared with the bones when she first came back, she now had a lot of meat on her body. Even her hair had grown a little longer. Compared with a few days ago, she looked twice as good. Today in the office, she suddenly remembered the feeling of the past. Ming simply got off work early and returned home. After waiting for a long time, Lily returned home. Ming touched her belly with his big hand, gently squeezed it, and said, "Is your illness better?" In order to respect her, Ming had not expressed any intention of asking for anything during this time. But today, he couldn't help it. Ming gently pressed her against the refrigerator door and leaned over to kiss her gently. Seeing this, Lily suddenly understood. Her heart tightened, and she felt a little nervous and guilty. Facing his fiery gaze, Lily put her hands around his neck and said, "Not yet." Lily was about to speak, but Ming had already pressed her down and kissed her fiercely. Yu Lily exclaimed, and her slender waist was almost broken. She shouted, "Be gentle." Oh Ming heard that and loosened his grip, but his action was still not gentle. Yu Lily let him do whatever he wanted, but her body didn't feel anything. She was even a little annoyed and disgusted. An idea quickly began to expand in her mind. All he wanted was her body. When this idea popped out, Yu Lily's originally reluctant heart felt more and more impatient. She gently pushed him away, but Oh Ming didn't let her move. He looked at her with a pair of deep peach blossom eyes. They looked at each other and didn't say a word. Chapter 9-10. Oh Ming stopped what he was doing and pulled himself away. Yu Lily touched his pocket and saw that he took out a bottle of something. Watching him use it, Yu Lily gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. Oh Ming continued. This time, Yu Lily didn't cry out in pain. She was carried to the sofa and they lay together. But no matter what he did, she didn't feel the slightest bit. The only feeling was discomfort. Yu Lily lay on the sofa and didn't feel anything at all. She was like a dead fish. Oh Ming almost thought that he was F***king. Oh Ming got up in annoyance, took a cigarette box on the side, lit it and took a long drag. Yu Lily was tired. After Oh Ming finished, she lay on the sofa and looked at him. She was a little tired and said, "I'm hungry." Oh Ming blew out a smoke ring. Looking at her innocent expression, he felt even more annoyed in his heart. This woman always had such an expression on her face. Even when he was at his most excited, she would still call him perfunctorily. How could a man tolerate this? Oh Ming narrowed his eyes and said, "Someone will deliver the food at 8 o'clock. As he spoke, he had already put on his clothes. Oh Ming picked up the car key and stood up. Yu Lily grabbed him and panicked. "What are you going to do?" "Let's go for a walk." Oh Ming moved her hand away and walked out. Yu Lily was a little disappointed. She watched him open the door and walk out. She sat on the sofa and felt a little lost. Enchanting listened to the commotion on the other side and heard all the strange noises. She could guess what was going on. There was only so little between a man and a woman. Without sex, how could there be love? Now, even their sex life was not harmonious. Oh Ming was at such a young and vigorous age, and his physical condition was so outstanding. Who would be able to endure it? Since Oh Ming was out now, it was time for her to do it. Enchanting picked up the phone and dialed Oh Ming's number. But soon, she immediately thought of something and pressed the number. After thinking about it, she called Xiao Ziqing. The phone was quickly connected. "Hello, Auntie." Enchanting's voice was sweet and easy to please. Xiao Ziqing had just finished her dinner and was in a good mood when she heard Enchanting's voice. She asked, "What's the matter? Why are you so happy?" "Really?" Enchanting looked in the mirror and smiled. She suddenly felt that the person in the mirror was beautiful. It's so easy to see. Actually I prepared a surprise for Oh Ming, but you know how he treats me. I'm afraid that he won't come. Can you ask him to come over? The little girl is quite smart. Where do you want him to go?" Enchanting was a little proud and said, "You can say that you are now in the Shishan Villa and wait for him to pick you up." Okay, I'll listen to you. I'll call him." Enchanting's heart was filled with joy. She quickly put the phone aside and entered the cloakroom. Just as he was about to find a bar to relax, he received a call from his mother. When he heard that she was in the West Mountain Villa, he suddenly felt a headache. Oh Ming drove to the Shishan Villa area and rang the doorbell. Chapter 9-11. Enchanting was obviously very happy to see him. She pulled him in and then closed the door. Oh Ming looked inside and frowned. He looked around and asked, "Where is my mother?" Enchanting stood behind Oh Ming and did not speak. Oh Ming turned around impatiently, but when he turned around, he was stunned. Enchanting had taken off her bathrobe. When Oh Ming turned around, he saw Enchanting's sexy figure at a glance. Her sexy black lace underwear accentuated her fair skin, making it look even more tender and beautiful. Oh Ming's eyes fell on her body immediately. Her beautiful body proportion, well-maintained skin, and figure were all the best. Shen Manting leaped up and pounced on Oh Ming. Oh Ming was shocked and subconsciously wanted to avoid her. Shen Manting had expected it. She turned around and hugged him tightly. Shen Manting was a little shorter than Yu Lily, but she was much sexier than Yu Lily. She was petite and exquisite. From Oh Ming's point of view, he could clearly see Shen Manting's deep white cleavage. Seduction. Oh Ming was a man, and a normal man in the prime of his life. He didn't enjoy himself at home. Now seeing such a picture, Oh Ming only felt his throat tighten. Shen Manting sensed his reaction and kissed him on the lips. Oh Ming swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Seeing her obvious seduction, he suddenly felt that he couldn't control himself. However, at the same time, his mind seemed to think of Yu Lily's beautiful face. Oh Ming turned his head and reached out to push her away. With a straight face, Oh Ming looked at Shen Manting in front of him and was a little annoyed. "What are you doing?" Shen Manting had delicate makeup on her face. She pouted and said, "We are engaged. Isn't it normal to meet each other's physical needs?" As she spoke, she walked toward Oh Ming and said, "Sooner or later, we will be husband and wife. Oh Ming, don't leave tonight." When Oh Ming heard that, his eyes flashed with disgust, and he said angrily, "Are you so short of men? TSK, your words are too hurtful. Oh Ming, you are my fiancé. Isn't your first duty to satisfy me?" Shen Manting walked up to him and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "It's better than staying with a mistress who can't satisfy you, right?" When Oh Ming heard that, his beautiful peach blossom eyes shone with a sharp light. Shen Manting was startled by the look in his eyes and stopped in her tracks. "What do you know?" Oh Ming looked at her and took a step forward. "Are you spying on me?" Oh Ming's aura was more powerful than Shen Manting had imagined. When he took a step forward, Shen Manting subconsciously took a step back. But then he realized that he should have gone up to meet them. She smiled coquettishly and stepped forward, saying, "If I had that ability, would I still be afraid that I wouldn't be able to take you down?" As she spoke, she untied the strap of her underwear and winked at him. "I know you also want to," she said coquettishly. Oh Ming's face darkened. He pushed her away without any pity and said angrily, "Get lost." Chapter 9:12. Oh Ming's face was cold. He turned and walked out. Shen Manting looked at Oh Ming's back and shouted, "What's so good about that mistress?" "Oh Ming, you be *****starred." Oh Ming opened the door wide and walked out without the slightest intention of closing the door. The cold wind blew in, and Shen Manting shivered from the cold. Seeing Oh Ming's lack of pity, Shen Manting was so angry that she hit the sofa and shouted, "Be *****starred." After what Shen Manting had done, Oh Ming felt even more suffocated. He found a random bar and downed a lot of alcohol. Oh Ming was drunk, but he could only lie on the bar, feeling dizzy. Losing his balance, Oh Ming fell straight down. Bang! The stool was overturned by Oh Ming, and the noise was loud. The waiter had a headache and helped him up. He said, "Sir, you should call someone to pick you up. How can you drink so much?" Oh Ming was dizzy from the fall, and his mind was a mess. The waiter knew that he was too drunk, so he said, "Where's your phone? Take it out and see who is the best person to call." When Oh Ming heard that, he took the phone out of his pocket and pressed the 1 key. The waiter was a little speechless because the number that Oh Ming dialed turned out to be the word that cursed people the most, bitch. Yu Lily was drawing. There were only a few strokes left on the last frame. Seeing that she was finally about to finish the first episode, she felt indescribably satisfied. The phone rang. It was Oh Ming. "Hello?" "Ah. Yu Lily." Oh Ming sounded drunk as he shouted, "I'm drinking." Yu Lily frowned and asked, "Where are you?" "Where am I?" "I don't know." Oh Ming sounded very drunk. Oh Ming's alcohol tolerance was very good. To be able to drink to this extent, how much could he drink? The waiter quickly took the phone and gave Yu Lily the address. Yu Lily put down her paintbrush without saying a word, put on some clothes, and took a taxi to the bar the waiter had mentioned. Oh Ming was helped to sit at the bar counter. In front of him was a large pile of wine bottles and glasses. Yu Lily had a headache. She quickly took her hand from the waiter and said, "Thank you. Let me do it." When Oh Ming heard Yu Lily's voice, he turned his head and smiled happily. "You're here." As he spoke, he hugged her with both hands and said, "Let's go home." The smell of alcohol filled the air. Yu Lily frowned in disgust, pushed him away, and said, "How much did you drink? The smell is so strong." When the waiter saw Yu Lily, he was a little surprised, but he still took out the bill and said, "This gentleman drank a lot of wine, and you haven't paid yet." Yu Lily looked at the list and felt a headache. Oh Ming held her in his arms and rested his head on her neck, panting slightly. He must have drunk too much and was feeling unwell, right? Yu Lily patted his face in disgust, took out the leather armor from his pocket, took out a card, and handed it to the waiter. The waiter took the POS machine and entered the password for Yu Lily. Yu Lily skillfully entered the password, but it was wrong. Yu Lily was stunned. When she saw the waiter's surprised look, she felt a little embarrassed. Chapter 9:13. Did he change the password? Yu Lily glanced at the card, frowned, and changed another one. There were many cards in Oh Ming's leather armor, but after trying 3 or 4 of them, the passwords were all wrong. Yu Lily's face was so hot that she could cook an egg. She patted Oh Ming's face and asked, "Hey, what is the password of your card?" Oh Ming was already asleep, and he didn't feel anything after being patted. Yu Lily just went out in a hurry, so she only brought enough money to take a taxi, and she didn't prepare a card at all. Now this situation is so embarrassing. Under everyone's gaze, Yu Lily searched Oh Ming's wallet again, and then took out 3 or 4 cards. After swiping them again, all of them were wrong. Feeling more and more strange eyes around, Yu Lily finally found a card, a red goddess card. It used to be used by her, and at the same time, it was also opened in her name. When Yu Lily saw this card, she couldn't tell how much she missed it. However, this card was the salary card that she enjoyed when she was still a nominal supervisor in a European-style shopping mall. At that time, she managed 3 or 4 stores, each of which was a big brand with very good business, so the dividends were naturally not to be underestimated. After Yu Lily returned all the money to Oh Ming, she left the card in the villa. Oh Ming had already cancelled her dividends, and now, there should be no money in it. However, it was the last card in Oh Ming's wallet. Sighing in her heart, Yu Lily handed the card to the waiter. At this point, she could only make a desperate attempt. The password of this card was Oh Ming's birthday. Oh Ming said it himself, and Yu Lily didn't change it back later. Yu Lily entered the password, and she had already prepared the excuse to put it on credit, but to her surprise, it showed that the payment was successful. The waiter finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, "We'll help you take him back. He drove here." "Okay, thank you." The waiter helped Oh Ming back to the car, and Yu Lily took the car key from Oh Ming's pocket and drove back to the apartment. Oh Ming was lying in the back seat all the way, and he howled from time to time. Yu Lily parked the car in the garage. When she looked at the back seat, Oh Ming had already fallen into the gap of the car seat. Yu Lily was exasperated. She reached out and pulled Oh Ming up. "That's too much. Why did you drink so much?" He tried to pull, but to no avail. Oh Ming seemed to know what she was doing and got up. After Yu Lily finally managed to drag him out, the further he walked, the more inclined he became. It was very difficult for Yu Lily to carry it. She pulled hard and shouted, "Stand straight." It was past midnight, and there weren't many people in the garage. Yu Lily's roar echoed in the garage. At the same time, a beautiful orange-red Maserati drove in and parked in the underground garage. Yu Lily was overjoyed and turned to look. The car soon came to a stop, and a man in a pink suit stepped out. When Shinjilia saw Yu Lily, he was shocked and overjoyed. When Yu Lily saw him, she felt that it was inevitable. She wanted to run, but Oh Ming was too heavy. Yu Lily's hands were sore, but she still couldn't move him. Chapter 9:14. Brother-in-law? Yu Lily couldn't believe it and looked at him. Brother-in-law? This man is called Shinjilia, and Oh Ming's fiancé is called Enchanting. It can't be so coincidental, can it? Is he Enchanting's younger brother? Shinjilia came forward and pulled Oh Ming up with one hand. He straightened Oh Ming's face and said, "Ha, it's really my future brother-in-law." But then he looked at Yu Lily with some disbelief and said, "Are you the mistress my sister talked about? My God, the world is so small." Yu Lily's heart sank. She glared at him and then slapped his hand away and shouted, "Get out of my way." Shinjilia also realized that his words might have been a little inappropriate, so he laughed dryly and ran over to Yu Lily. He reached out his hand to take Oh Ming from her. Yu Lily roared, "Get out of my way, don't touch my man. He is not your brother-in-law." Shinjilia was shocked by her anger and waved his hand helplessly. Well, but you can't carry him alone. Let me help you carry him up, okay?" Yu Lily's eyes were red, and she stared at him. She put her hands under Oh Ming's armpits and half dragged and half pulled him to the elevator. Shinjilia knew that he said something wrong, so he shut his mouth. But when he saw her struggling, he couldn't stand it anymore. He went forward and pulled Oh Ming, who was in her arms, over and said, "Oh, let me help you. Let's go." Shinjilia pulled Oh Ming. Obviously, he was much stronger than Yu Lily. He pulled Oh Ming up without any effort. Yu Lily looked at him, and her heart was empty. This man turned out to be Oh Ming's future brother-in-law. Shinjilia carried Oh Ming to the elevator. When he turned his head, he found that Yu Lily was still standing in the same place. He shouted, "Hey, follow me." "Which floor is it?" Yu Lily walked up quickly, and the elevator arrived. When the elevator door opened, Yu Lily stepped in and pressed the button for the 28th floor. He said, "You are so cunning. I went to the 26th floor to look for you many times, but the 4 owners of the 26th floor said they didn't know you. It turns out that you live on the 28th floor. My brother-in-law is the only one living on the 28th floor. You really live with my brother-in-law." Moreover, it was said that this was Oh Ming's private residence. Even Oh Ming's parents had never been here before. How could this woman live here so openly? Shinjilia looked at her and shook his head. Yu Lily didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt sympathy and regret on Shinjilia's face. Yu Lily glared at him. Before Yu Lily could speak, Oh Ming spoke first. Oh Ming's voice carried a strong sense of intoxication. He opened his eyes, which were bloodshot. He raised his hand and reached out to Yu Lily. Yu Lily went forward and hugged him. Her heart was slightly sour. She whispered, "Well, I'm here. I'm home." As Yu Lily got closer, the distance between her and Shinjilia was also shortened. Shinjilia could clearly smell the fresh fragrance of Yu Lily in addition to the smell of alcohol on Oh Ming's body. It smelled good, and it was very comfortable, just like her. Shinjilia sniffed and felt his heart was moved. He said, "Your name is Yu Lily, right? I've heard of you." Chapter 9:15. Yu Lily heard that and ignored him. Ding. When the elevator arrived, Yu Lily held Oh Ming and said, "I'll go in by myself." "Thank you, Mr. Shen." Shinjilia was not stupid. He could clearly hear the deliberate alienation in Yu Lily's words. But he still pretended not to understand and said, "You're welcome. We are neighbors. I'll help you to help him in." As soon as she finished speaking, she pulled Oh Ming to the door without giving him a chance to speak. Yu Lily looked at him and quickly pressed the password. She looked up and found that Shinjilia had consciously turned his head away. She breathed a sigh of relief and watched Shinjilia help Oh Ming into the house. Oh Ming opened his eyes in a daze. When he saw that it was his home, he pushed Shinjilia away and walked inside. At the same time, he shouted drunkenly, "You Lily!" "I'm here," Yu Lily answered and hurried forward. But when Oh Ming saw her, he laughed drunkenly, pulled her over, and said, "You're back. I missed you so much." Such straightforward drunken words made Yu Lily's heart flutter. With her cheeks blushing, she gently pushed him and said, "Stop it. There are outsiders here. Yu Lily, I love you. I love you so much. What should I do? Are you poisonous?" "Huh." His drunken words made Yu Lily's heart beat faster and faster. Is this the legendary words spoken after drinking? She had never seen or heard such words from Oh Ming. Oh Ming's eyes were full of tenderness and honey as he looked at her. His beautiful eyes clearly reflected Yu Lily. Oh Ming leaned toward her, raised his big hand, pressed her head, and kissed her. Yu Lily was a little resistant and subconsciously looked in the direction of Shinjilia. She wanted to break away from Oh Ming, but Oh Ming was drunk, and his strength was even more amazing. Shinjilia looked a little embarrassed, but at the same time, he felt a little annoyed. After all, Oh Ming was his future brother-in-law. Although Shinjilia knew that Oh Ming had a mistress at home, being kissed so openly with a mistress would make him feel uncomfortable. But what could he do? At that moment, Shinjilia felt extremely awkward. It wasn't just because of his current situation, but also because of his current status. What should he do? Should he go and beat him up? However, he was not very angry. It was that girl who turned out to be Oh Ming's mistress, which made Shinjilia feel a little regretful. After taking a look, Shinjilia quietly turned around and reached out to close the door behind him. "I love you, too," Yu Lily said softly and took the initiative to look up at him. Oh Ming wasn't very conscious, but he knew who the woman he was holding was. Hearing her words, he chuckled softly, carried her to the sofa, and sat down. Oh Ming hugged her and lay on the sofa with a satisfied smile on his lips. He closed his eyes and pulled her into his embrace. I highly recommend my new book, 99 Days of Hidden Marriage. Chief, please be reserved. It's super good on the surface. He was a cold-hearted young master who was loyal to his country, but in secret, he was an all-powerful and mysterious monarch. She schemed step by step, cheated him of all his first times, left all his property, and ran away. Unexpectedly, the next day, she was brought to the church with a knife. He announced in a loud voice, "Marry or die." Chapter 9:16. Oh Ming held her and lay on the sofa with a satisfied smile on his lips. He closed his eyes and circled her in his arms. One night, Yu Lily was sore all over. The sofa was too small to accommodate both of them. But Oh Ming held her all night, and Yu Lily didn't dare to move easily. Throughout the night, both of them maintained the same position, and their bodies were stiff. Oh Ming had a splitting headache. When he woke up, he was holding the woman in his arms and was a little confused. The clothes on his upper body were still intact, but there was nothing on his lower body. There was a smooth touch in his arms. Oh Ming gently moved, and Yu Lily woke up. Feeling the softness in his arms, Oh Ming was a little reluctant to let her go. He held her tightly and whispered, "How did I come back last night?" Yu Lily heard this and was a little dumbfounded. She elbowed him back and said, "You still have the nerve to ask." She briefly explained what happened, but Oh Ming listened with a blank face. "Did you forget?" Yu Lily looked at him and was a little disappointed. Oh Ming also shook his head and said, "I forgot, but there is one thing I remember very clearly." "What?" Yu Lily asked curiously. Oh Ming leaned over, gently pressed her down, and said, "Is your coldness cured?" Yu Lily blushed, and before she could speak, Oh Ming hugged her tightly and bent his head to kiss her. Dense hot kisses fell on Yu Lily's collarbone and neck. The traces of last night were still clearly in front of her, and the smile on Oh Ming's face widened. Entering, Yu Lily let out a cry of surprise. Her legs were folded, and she gritted her teeth to bear him. The sofa swayed with their movements, but Yu Lily had no feeling of last night, and even some pain. It was not the same feeling as last night. Frowning, Yu Lily pushed him away. At the same time, there was a trace of sticky blood. Oh Ming was stunned and asked, "Are you bleeding?" Yu Lily was also a little confused. She reached out and touched it, and there was indeed blood. Her waist was also a little sore. She thought it was because she maintained the same position all night, but now it seemed that it was. Aunt Flo calculating the time, Aunt menstruation seemed to have been delayed. Under normal circumstances, it should have happened the day before yesterday or the day before yesterday. Looking at Oh Ming's obviously broken expression, she smiled apologetically and said, "It seems like I'm on my period." The corners of Oh Ming's lips twitched as he felt like he was about to be blown away by the wind. Yu Lily felt a little guilty and shrank her head. All of a sudden, Yu Lily looked up and shouted, "What time is it now?" Looking at the time, it was already past 8 in the morning. It's over, it's over." Yu Lily hurriedly put on her clothes and said, "It's too late for work. What should I do? The editor-in-chief doesn't like me. If he finds out, he will fire me directly. It's all your fault." When Oh Ming heard that, he frowned and looked at her. "The chief editor is against you?" "Why?" "How would I know why? I was there to interview for the position of assistant editor, but the chief editor insisted that I go to the front desk. He even gave me a look as if I was taking advantage of him. Oh my God, this is ridiculous." Chapter 9:17. "No, if I ask for leave, Editor-in-Chief Zhou will deal with me. I don't want to lose this job." Yu Lily shouted as she put on her clothes. She looked at the time. It was almost 9 o'clock. It would take at least half an hour to get there. Yu Lily felt that her life was bleak. She sat on the sofa in despair and shouted, "It's over. I'm doomed to be late." Oh Ming looked at her timid appearance and felt helpless. Yu Lily didn't notice the change in Oh Ming's expression. She quickly changed her clothes, put on a sanitary pad, picked up her bag, and ran. But when she started running, Yu Lily suddenly felt sore all over. Damn it, it was not only because she didn't sleep well last night, but also because of her period and the crazy morning. Yu Lily took the subway to the company and was ready to be scolded by Editor-in-Chief Zhou. Gasping, Yu Lily looked at the time. Yu Lily knew that she couldn't escape the scolding, so she ran to Editor-in-Chief Zhou's office. Seeing Editor-in-Chief Zhou sitting at the desk, she closed her eyes and shouted, "Editor-in-Chief Zhou, I'm sorry I'm late." Her voice was loud and full of infinite sincerity. However, the storm that she imagined did not come as expected. Yu Lily quietly opened her eyelids and looked forward. Editor-in-Chief Zhou seemed to be in a heavy mood, staring at Yu Lily. Yu Lily felt her hair stand on end. She shrunk her head and said, "Today, did you punch in?" Editor-in-Chief Zhou looked at her, and her voice was indescribably soft. Yu Lily closed her eyes, shook her head again, and said, "Not yet. Go and punch in. There are a lot of contracts waiting for you to review today. Ziyu asked for leave today. Go and study with Yi Qianqian." Yu Lily was a little stunned. Looking at the kind Editor-in-Chief Zhou in front of her, she felt that the sun was rising from the west. She didn't scold me? Why? She actually asked me to study with Yi Qianqian? My God, is today the end of the world? However, the more Editor-in-Chief Zhou behaved like this, the more Yu Lily dared not act rashly. Looking at Editor-in-Chief Zhou, Yu Lily asked, "What about the receptionist?" "The staff at the front desk will be here next week. You have to learn first before you can be a good editor. Go and clock in. Since this is the first time you've been late, I won't deduct your salary. If there's a next time, I won't let you off so easily." Yu Lily felt a little confused. Today's Editor-in-Chief Zhou is too easy to talk to. However, Yu Lily couldn't have asked for more. After nodding, she ran away. When Yu Lily left, Editor-in-Chief Zhou immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at the young face on the computer screen and said with a smile, "Special Assistant Sue, as you can see, I have nothing to say about you, Lily. I hope you won't complain to the president." I didn't know that she had a relationship with the president. It was Miss Shen who asked me to do this. If I had known, I wouldn't have listened to her. When Su Qing heard this, he shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. Go to the Human Resource Department at the headquarters to go through the formalities." Assistant. Chapter 9:18. He didn't even give her a chance to explain or redeem herself. Editor-in-Chief Zhou's face suddenly turned pale, and she couldn't believe it. Editor-in-Chief Zhou's strength was beyond doubt. But the most important point was that Editor-in-Chief Zhou knew how to read people's words and expressions. Although it was a bit despicable, such a method was undoubtedly time-tested. But, who knew that I would fall into such a trap? Could it be that the face of the future CEO's wife was not as important as that of a special assistant? Although Yu Lily was appointed by Special Assistant Su to stay, she is still the future wife of the president. How could Special Assistant Su do this? The more Editor-in-Chief Zhou thought about it, the angrier she became. Special Assistant Su wants to abuse his power and fire me? Huh, what a joke. In any case, she was considered a wily old fox. How could she be fired so easily? Editor-in-Chief Zhou picked up the phone and dialed Shenmanting's number. Editor-in-Chief Zhou felt so wrong that her eyes turned red. Hearing that the phone was picked up, Editor-in-Chief Zhou immediately began to feel wronged. Editor-in-Chief Zhou told the story roughly, and even added oil and vinegar. Finally, she asked, "What should we do, Miss Shen?" "Special Assistant Su has gone too far." Shenmanting seemed to chuckle and said, "I can't control this. After all, I also have to look at his mood. Maybe you can pretend to be pitiful and ask Yu Lily for help. Maybe she will sympathize with you and help you so that you won't be fired." Yi Qianqian was speechless. "Miss Shen, I'm doing this to help you. If I didn't help you, how could I have transferred Yu Lily to the front desk? How could I have targeted her again and again? I know that you installed a listening device in the thing you gave her last time. Do you think she'll hate you to death if I tell her?" Editor-in-Chief Zhou's voice was a bit gloomy. "She doesn't seem to be on guard against you at all. If I remind her, what do you think she will do?" Yu Lily stood outside and heard those words clearly. She stood there in disbelief. Subconsciously, she glanced at the beautiful little fur ball hanging on her bag. That thing was really beautiful, and Yu Lily liked it very much. However, such a small thing actually had a listening device in it. Also, did Chief Editor Zhou just say Miss Shen? Is she O Ming's fiancé, Shenmanting? Yu Lily gritted her teeth angrily. It turned out that Shenmanting had already gotten close to her and was targeting her. Poor Yu Lily. She didn't even know it. If it wasn't for the fact that she wanted to come over and thank him, she would probably be in even more trouble in the next few days. Yu Lily angrily plucked the fur ball and planned to throw it away. But then, as if he had thought of something, he retracted the little fur ball. Since it was a listening device, it should be able to hear everything from her side, right? In other words, wherever Furball was, all sounds could be clearly transmitted. Thinking of this, Yu Lily actually felt that it was a little fun. The corners of her lips curled up, and traces of playfulness flashed across her beautiful almond-shaped eyes. She had already delivered herself to his doorstep, so why should he let her off so easily? It was time to recoup the losses. Chapter 9:19. Looking at Editor-in-Chief Zhou inside, Yu Lily turned around and returned to her seat. Putting down her bag, Yu Lily went back to Editor-in-Chief Zhou's office. Editor-in-Chief Zhou might have just finished a phone call. Her eyes were red. When she saw Yu Lily, she sniffed and looked like she was about to cry. Yu Lily walked in and watched Editor-in-Chief Zhou close the door. Editor-in-Chief Zhou looked at her actions and felt a little inexplicable. At the same time, she was a little angry and asked, what do you want to do? Yu Lily did not answer. After sitting down, she looked around, then picked up her mobile phone and typed, "You don't have a listening device in here, do you?" Editor-in-Chief Zhou was stunned. She looked around and found that Shenmanting had sent gifts everywhere. It was hard to say. But seeing Yu Lily like this, she knew that she might have already known something. Editor-in-Chief Zhou stopped hiding and gave her a look. "Let's talk outside." The two reached an agreement for a while, and it was indescribably harmonious. Editor-in-Chief Zhou took Yu Lily to the rooftop of the company. In addition to her clothes, she did not even bring her mobile phone. She said, "Tell me, what do you want to say? You just called Shenmanting, didn't you? I heard everything just now. Are you in some kind of trouble that you can't solve?" When Editor-in-Chief Zhou heard Yu Lily's question, she felt a little hypocritical. She sneered and said, "What do you think? I really didn't expect you to have such a good relationship with Special Assistant Su. Now, Su Cheng, that B***starred, wants me to leave." Su Cheng? Hearing the name, Yu Lily was stunned. Su Cheng, wasn't he the young man who worked with Oh Ming in the capital? It turned out to be him. So, her work was arranged by Oh Ming? Yu Lily suddenly felt depressed. It turned out to be like this. Why did he ask you to leave? You went to Shenmanting? Editor-in-Chief Zhou looked at her suspiciously and asked, "Do you really not know? I should have thought of it long ago." At that time, when the website was newly opened, every editor was very idle. There was no need for an assistant editor at all. Why would there be a need to recruit people for no reason? That's Sean you should be helping you to cover up. It was only logical for her to let you in. It's a pity that I didn't know. If I had known, I wouldn't have targeted you like that. Shenmanting asked me to take good care of you. Sigh. Do you want revenge? I have a way to deal with her. Yu Lily already had an idea in her mind. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Editor-in-Chief Zhou. Maybe I can convince Special Assistant Su to let you stay. Editor-in-Chief Zhou looked at her suspiciously and nodded. With the help of Oh Ming's mother, Shenmanting was now working at the headquarters of the O Group. At that moment, she was having a regular department meeting. However, this roundabout meeting of department heads was really boring. Shenmanting placed her phone under the table and played with it. Suddenly, she received a multimedia message. It was Chief Editor Zhou's. It wasn't a photo, but a short video. Looking at the cover, it was dark. Chapter 920. Shenmanting was disdainful. She knew that these words were just a gimmick. However, she was attracted by this gimmick. Shenmanting clicked on the download button, but before she clicked on the play button, the video popped up automatically. Shenmanting was shocked and subconsciously wanted to turn it off. However, she couldn't control it. The volume was instantly turned up, as if it had been poisoned. It was completely out of Shenmanting's control. A loud sound rang out, and it was actually a pa sound that made people blush and their hearts beat rapidly. In an instant, everyone's eyes fell on Shenmanting. Shenmanting blushed and hurried to get the phone. This sound was accompanied by a woman's scream, "Ah! Brother, don't." The voice was very loud, and it was particularly loud in the quiet department meeting room. Everyone looked at Shenmanting with a strange look in their eyes. Shenmanting felt like dying. She plugged the speaker, but it didn't work at all. Not only could she not turn down the volume, but she also couldn't press the button to turn off the phone. Shenmanting, you've gone too far. Don't you know we're in a meeting now? The department supervisor was furious and slammed the table. How can you watch this kind of thing during working hours? You're a woman. Don't you have any shame? The department supervisor was originally dissatisfied with Shenmanting. Because of her connections, Shenmanting's position in the department was second only to the supervisor when she came in. Other people might not be able to climb to this position for many years, but Shenmanting was the president's fiancée. But now, there was finally a chance to make a fuss. How could she not seize it? You're a woman. Even if you're the president's fiancé, so what? You're too shameless. It's not me. Ennchanting wanted to die. Listening to the supervisor's scolding, her face turned green and white. I didn't mean it. It's you. Take out the phone. The department supervisor stretched out his hand. Hurry up. Ennchanting took out the phone, and the passionate voice on it became louder. Ennchanting couldn't turn it off, and the picture on it was also presented in front of everyone. The scale was very big. The supervisor was furious and said, "Are you that thirsty? Look, I can't turn it off. I just received a document. Someone must have deliberately sent it to me to frame me." Ennchanting roared, her face as red as blood. The department head casually pressed a button and the video was turned off. Ennchanting was shocked and couldn't believe it. How could that be? What else do you have to say? I will tell the higher-ups to criticize you by name. Write me a self-criticism report before tomorrow. The supervisor threw her phone back to her and said sternly. Ennchanting held her phone in a daze. He casually pressed a button, and the video actually ran out on its own. It was very high profile. The department head was furious and roared, "Get out, get out." Her colleagues snickered. Ennchanting was on the verge of tears. She wanted to turn off the video, but she couldn't. Ennchanting lifted the lid of the cup in front of her and threw the phone into it. The phone was soaked in water. After flashing a few times, there was no sound. Ennchanting walked out, her eyes red with anger. "Zhou, you're finished." Chapter 921. As for editor-in-chief Zhou, she didn't know what had happened after she lent the phone to Yu Lily. Yu Lily was in a good mood after she implanted the virus and dragged Ennchanting's phone number out of the blacklist. Editor-in-chief Zhou only knew that Yu Lily had helped her stay in Eurasian comics, so she was grateful to Yu Lily. Ennchanting also knew that editor-in-chief Zhou framed her, but she wouldn't burn the fire of war on Yu Lily. She killed with a borrowed knife, but she didn't get involved. Yu Lily was in a good mood. Looking at the little fur ball, Yu Lily took it off and put it in the drawer. Returning the phone to editor-in-chief Zhou, Yu Lily could easily see the current status of Ennchanting's phone through the computer. It's broken. Gee, in order to stop the phone from ringing, she actually broke the phone. That's amazing. But it doesn't matter, I still have a backup plan. After entering Ennchanting's number, Yu Lily quickly set up the location. Even if Ennchanting's phone was destroyed, the number should not be changed. From now on, I just have to wait for the rabbit. Sure enough, Ennchanting's phone number was turned back on in the evening. But obviously, it had changed to a different device. This model looked good on the outside, but fortunately, it didn't use the best security system. After Yu Lily locked the number, she hacked into the phone. There were many social platforms that were bound to this phone number. Yu Lily directly hacked into WeChat and scanned the address book. After thinking about it, she exited and opened a software that was rarely used by ordinary people, but it was necessary. After hacking, she installed a monitoring virus in it. Isn't she monitoring me? Then let me have a taste of being monitored. But unfortunately, Ennchanting seemed to have a party after work, eating and sleeping, and there seemed to be nothing else to listen to. When talking to her best friend, there were many black spots. Several times, Yu Lily heard it and laughed. However, it was useless. Yu Lily called Su Cheng and pleaded for editor-in-chief Zhou without any integrity. As expected, just after editor-in-chief Zhou was almost fired, Yu Lily's life became much better. The next day, Yu Lily finished the last frame and gave the drawing to Sisai. However, Sisi still didn't know that Yu Lily was Li Xiaoyu. When Sisi saw the drawing, she was stunned. Looking at the style of the drawing and the idea of the plot, she asked, "Did you draw all this yourself? Your own original design?" Yu Lily, yes. Based on her own story, Yu Lily painted an orphan who went astray and then met a domineering president. However, comics were still comics. Yu Lily tried her best to beautify the details and facts. The first episode was about the meeting of the male and female leads. The name of the comic was Transactional Love. The male lead was called Xiao, and the female lead was called Li Xiaoyu. The title of the first episode was Dirty Deals. Yu Lily could clearly see that Yi Qianqian was reading the comic, but she didn't say anything. Chapter 922. Yi Qianqian's excitement soon aroused the curiosity of other colleagues. They gathered around and asked, "What's going on?" Yi Qianqian mysteriously closed the comic and said, "I feel like I've picked up a treasure. I've recruited an amazing artist, and it's even an original work. No, I'm going to use this as a promotional comic." As he spoke, he clicked open the chat box with Li Xiaoyu and sent her a message. "Sisai, when can you give me the second episode?" Yu Lily silently clicked on the chat box and replied to a message, "I draw very slowly, and it will take about a week. Sisai, the quality is really good. I plan to make your comic the main comic. I will promote it first. Can you give me the second episode as soon as possible?" Yuli, yes. They happily reached an agreement, and Yi Qianqian did things without hesitation. In an instant, he had contacted all the departments and started to promote the comic. Because it was a new website, there were not many high-quality comics received. As soon as the comic was launched, the promotion forum and Weibo immediately exploded. The technical department was surprised to find that in less than 24 hours, the number of downloads was tens of thousands higher than usual. There was a huge cheer in the office for a while. Yu Lily saw it and was also ecstatic. On the third day, Yi Qianqian told Yu Lily, "The promotion effect is better than expected." "Amazing." Yuli, hey, thank you. Sisai, the company has decided to give you a gift. What do you want? Yuli, a digital screen. My current digital screen is secondhand, and it often runs out of power and lags. If possible, can you give me a new digital screen? Sisai, okay, give me the address. Yu Lily directly sent the address. Yi Qianqian saw the address and was a little surprised. She said, "Hey, I found that the author of Love Transaction lives in Kingstown. It's so close. It's only half an hour from here. Wow, it's also a rich area. This location is so expensive." Yu Lily looked down at the contract and pretended not to hear. Shan Yu passed by Yu Lily with a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked up and saw a chat box with Sisai on the desktop of Yu Lily's computer. She looked down and saw that Yu Lily had sent an address to Zixixi. But, before Shan Yu could see what it was, Yu Lily turned it off. Yu Lily turned her head and looked over. Shan Yu smiled at her and walked away with her coffee. Shan Yu felt a little strange and glanced at Yi Qianqian's computer next to her. However, Yi Qianqian had already closed the chat box, so Shan Yu didn't see anything. However, he felt that it was a little strange. What is the relationship between Yu Lily and Yi Qianqian? My period came suddenly, but it left slowly. On the 6th day after her period came, she finally showed signs of leaving. Yu Lily made herself a cup of milk tea and sat in front of the computer to read her comics. But after looking at it for a long time, he was a little tired of it. He picked up his cell phone and opened Enchanting's cell phone. The other side seemed to be on the phone. Yu Lily turned on the speaker and took a sip of milk tea. Chapter 923. How could that be? Wedding dresses are designed to keep you warm. You just need to be a good bride. Yu Lily's brain buzzed. The wedding date is set. On the 23rd of December? Isn't that soon? It's already the end of November on the lunar calendar. It's too fast, how could it be? It's so sudden. Yu Lily wasn't prepared at all. Besides, didn't O Ming say that he would marry her? He would marry her because he didn't like Enchanting, did he? Why? Why didn't he make it clear to me? Did O Ming count as having a foot in two boats? Yu Lily, who had been in a good mood, suddenly collapsed. She looked at the time. It was past 8:00 in the evening. However, Ming hadn't come back yet. She called Ming. Ming seemed to be very busy. Many people were talking in English. Hello? Ming, are you home? I'll be late. I'm still busy. Go to bed early. Okay. Lily hung up the phone and sighed. She packed up the manga and threw it to Sisai. She went to bed early. When Ming came back, it was already midnight. Lily didn't want to talk to him. She was going to ask him about it the next day, but when she woke up the next day, she found that he had gone out again. The position next to her was still warm, but she couldn't touch him. However, it was worth celebrating that when the second episode of Love Transaction was released, it ignited the craze of chasing the latest chapters. Because of such a comic, the traffic of Eurasian comics reached an all-time high, and Yi Qianqian became a hero in the company. All the colleagues and employees of the company went out to party, singing, drinking, and playing dice. Lily was a very open person, so she played with Yi Qianqian. However, Yi Qianqian's drinking capacity was very poor, and she lost a lot of times when playing dice. The first few times, Yi Qianqian drank all the dice, but soon she couldn't stand it. Later, Lily helped her drink a few glasses, and then they got drunk together. Yi Qianqian asked her sister to pick her up, but she waited in the room for a long time, but she didn't come. He was furious. When he tried to call Yi Yu, the call didn't go through even once. Lily had a good tolerance for alcohol, so she could handle it. After sending Yi Qianqian back, she took a taxi home. Back home, Ming sat in the living room working. When he saw her come back stinking of alcohol, he frowned with dissatisfaction. He closed the computer, frowned, and asked, "Why did you drink so much?" Lily did drink a little too much, but for Lily, this level only made her a little dizzy. When she saw Ming, Lily rushed over to him and shouted, "Ming, I'm back." He caught her firmly with both hands and held her in his arms. As soon as he lowered his head, he could smell the smell of cigarettes and alcohol on her. Smelling it, he felt even more dissatisfied and asked, "How much did you drink?" Chapter 924. Ming picked her up and said helplessly, "Yes, I will. I think so too, but I can't tell them. If I tell them, they will look at me differently. What if they all fall in love with me? What will you do then?" Yulai giggled and put his arms around Ming's neck, grinning brightly. Ming was also amused by her and walked toward the room with her in his arms. Lily habitually hugged him and kissed him, saying, "Ming, what do you think our relationship is now?" The ancients said that alcohol could boost one's courage. This sentence was really true. If Lily had said such a sentence in the past, she would not have dared to say it. But now, she said it so naturally. However, it was also after she said it that Lily felt that something was wrong. Ming looked at her, and there was an obscure light in his beautiful peach blossom eyes that Lily could not understand. Seeing the change in Ming's eyes, Lily's heartbeat involuntarily accelerated. This issue was a bit sensitive. Lily had never known what their relationship was. They lived under the same roof, but they were not husband and wife. On the surface, they seemed to be together, but he still had a fiancé waiting in the open. It was impossible to say that she did not mind. Lily was actually a very possessive person. Although she did not say it, she actually cared about it more than anyone else. But, so what? Lily still did not dare to say it. She was afraid. She was afraid that Ming would think that she was too nosy and talk to her like before in the capital. Every word that came out of his mouth was like the sharpest of thorns, stabbing into her heart and making her feel pain. At that time, Lily was afraid that she could not help but want to escape, so she simply ignored it. She wanted to stay by Ming's side, even as a lover. As long as she was with him, Lily looked at Ming with a pair of eyes, a little drunk, and said with a smile, "Forget it, you don't have to answer, I know." Ming lowered his eyes, and his eyes became deeper. He gently put her on the bed and lowered his head to kiss her. The smell of beer came, but Oh Ming did not dislike it at all. He gently kissed her and gradually moved down. Yu Lily raised her hands, crossed her legs, and closed her eyes. She actually fell asleep. Seeing her like this, Oh Ming chuckled. He helped her take off her coat and sweater, tucked her in, and planted a kiss on her forehead. He turned off the lights, turned around, and walked out to continue working. Not long after Oh Ming left, Yu Lily suddenly opened her eyes. She got up and found some clothes to take a shower. By the time he finished showering, half an hour had already passed. Oh Ming leaned against the headboard and watched her walk out. He waved at her and said, "Come here." Yu Lily obediently walked over. Her cheeks were still a little hot, with the obvious red of alcohol. "Do you know who I am?" "My man." Yu Lily smiled and leaned over to hug him. When Oh Ming heard those 3 words, he was in a good mood. He held her in his arms and asked, "Have you left?" "Well." Yu Lily pretended to be confused and hesitated. She knew what he was asking. She left, but she did not want to. After some hesitation, he shook his head and said, "No." Chapter 925. Yu Lily was so directly exposed that she was a little embarrassed. She shrank her neck and pretended to be confused. "What did you say?" "Leave?" Still pretending. Oh Ming directly lowered his head, lifted her clothes, and bit her. "You are asking for a beating," Yu Lily exclaimed. She blushed and said, "You are so annoying." "I am annoying?" "Huh." Oh Ming's actions became more rough. He sucked her neck hard and asked vaguely, "Why do you hate me?" Aware of his actions, Yu Lily felt even more bored. She half closed her eyes and said, "I'm sleepy." Oh Ming's action stopped. He looked at her with a pair of burning eyes and said, "Then you go to sleep." Yu Lily really closed her eyes and ignored Oh Ming. Oh Ming was a little unhappy. He teased everywhere, but Yu Lily really closed her eyes and did not give him any response. "Stop it. I am so sleepy." Yu Lily reached out and patted him. Oh Ming's eyes became darker. Yu Lily suddenly opened her eyes wide and clamped her legs. She shouted, "What are you doing?" "Ah." Yu Lily only felt disgusted and shouted, "You are so dirty. Don't do this." Oh Ming did not listen to her. He kissed her a few times, but Yu Lily struggled even more. Yu Lily struggled with her legs and shouted, "Oh Ming, you are so disgusting. I don't like it. I don't like it at all." Oh Ming was a little annoyed. He pushed his body up, pinched her face, and lowered his head to kiss her. Yu Lily felt even more disgusted. He had just kissed her there, how could it be? Yu Lily didn't know whether it was because of the alcohol or something else, but her stomach was tumbling. After pushing him away, she retched. Oh Ming's eyelids twitched, and he was furious. He straightened her legs, turned her face back with his big hand, and said, "What do you mean?" Yu Lily's stomach was full of anger. Being twisted by him, she couldn't struggle. Yu Lily's face turned red, and she turned her head and vomited. The vomit flowed down her cheek and onto Oh Ming's hand. Oh Ming's face became more and more gloomy. This woman actually vomited. After he let go of her, Yu Lily couldn't hold it in any longer. She lay on the edge of the bed and retched. It was full of the smell of wine. Oh Ming frowned deeply. Looking at Yu Lily's appearance, he pulled up his clothes and walked away. Bang! The door was slammed shut, and Yu Lily suddenly shivered. Wiping the corner of her mouth, Yu Lily got up, opened the door and walked out, only to see Oh Ming slam the door. Bang! The sound of the door slamming made Yu Lily freeze in place. He seemed to be really angry. What to do? Yu Lily knew very well that she didn't want to vomit because she drank too much, but because of his touch. Under the influence of alcohol, Yu Lily couldn't help herself. What to do? She seemed to have angered him. Oh Ming felt a little scared. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He was afraid that he would strangle her to death in a fit of rage. After staying in the hotel for a night, Oh Ming got up early the next morning and headed home. Chapter 926. Oh Ming's heart seemed to be pinched by something, and his heart was aching. He went forward and gently pushed her, shouting, You Lily was sleepy. When she looked up, she saw Oh Ming's face. Only then did Oh Ming see her face clearly, and his heart ached even more fiercely. You Lily's eyes were swollen like walnuts. When she first saw him, she pursed her lips and burst into tears. You Lily rushed forward and shouted, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You Lily held his waist with her hands, and her head arched against his chest. With a weak cry, she held him tightly. She was afraid. Afraid of what? However, unconsciously, Oh Ming's mood, which had been depressed all night, quietly relaxed. He helped her up, and You Lily felt pain all over her body. Being pulled by him, the pain was so painful that she gasped. Oh Ming touched her face and found that her body was frighteningly cold. He was a little angry and said, Don't tell me that you stayed here all night. Get dressed. Oh Ming's face was ugly. He pulled her up and said, Get dressed, and I'll take you to see a doctor. As he spoke, he walked her into the room. You Lily was pulled, and her body was cold. Today is Saturday. Many experts should not be at work. And I don't want to go to the hospital. Go to see a psychiatrist. Oh Ming pushed her into the room, then went to the cloakroom to find her coat, and said, Go directly to the doctor, not the hospital. Psychiatrist? Yes. Oh Ming's movement stopped, and subconsciously thought of the last time he was in the capital. He was depressed and said, Sexual apathy is also caused by psychological factors. Luo Zhan's brother is a psychiatrist. Although he is a little romantic, he is more reliable at critical moments. Luo Zhan has a brother? You Lily looked at him with a blank face. Well, get dressed, and I'll call him. Luo Ran's annual leave was over, and during this time, he ate, played, and had fun. It was not easy to go back to work, but he was tired after 2 days. He was lying in the room when Luo Zhan woke him up. He almost slapped him. Luo Zhan avoided him easily, smiled, and said, Big brother, there is business, private work. Do you still remember Oh Ming? Oh Ming? Hearing this name, Luo Ran immediately got up from the bed. Oh Ming? Yes, my good friend, the young master of the O group, is very rich. Luo Ran came to his senses and lit a cigarette. He was a little surprised. Why is he looking for me? I don't know. You'll know when he comes. Anyway, he will pay a lot of money. You have to take a good look at him. Just as he finished speaking, the doorbell rang. Luo Ran's eyes widened as he roared and threw a punch. F***ck. So fast. Are you trying to trick me? Luo Zhan quickly dodged and said, I'll open the door. You Lily walked in with Oh Ming, and Luo Zhan immediately saw her swollen eyes. Shaking his head, Luo Zhan opened the door and let them in. He shouted, Brother, they are here. Luo Ran. Chapter 927. When You Lily saw Luo Ran, she was a little surprised. At the same time, she turned to look at Luo Zhan and exclaimed, Twins? Yes, yes. Luo Zhan touched his nose, pulled his casual loose pants, and glanced at Luo Ran's handsome tight leather coat, nodded, and said, Twins. You Lily was speechless. The gap was a little big. What's the matter? Luo Ran looked at You Lily, and there was an unruly smile on his face. Do you feel uncomfortable? You Lily looked at him, then looked at Luo Zhan, and whispered, I seem to be sexually apathetic. Luo Ran was a little surprised, looked at Oh Ming, raised his eyebrows, and asked, Sexually apathetic? Oh Ming nodded. Oh. Luo Ran turned and walked in, then said to Yu Lily, come with me. Luo Ran led Yu Lily to a room, which was empty. The four walls were painted particularly white, and there were only 2 stools and a table inside. Luo Ran sat behind the table, pointed to the stool in front of the table, and said, sit down. Yu Lily sat down and looked at Luo Ran. Luo Ran quickly got into character and said, next, I will ask you a few questions, and you must answer me as soon as possible. You can't be shy, and you must answer truthfully. Okay. What's your name? Luo Ran's tone was a little fast. When Yu Lily heard this question, she couldn't help but be excited, and she answered, Yu Lily. How old are you? 24 years old. What work are you doing now? Assistant editor, drawing comics. How long have you been working? More than half a month. Are you happy? Not bad. Luo Ran looked at her and asked faster, when did you have sex for the first time? Yu Lily was stunned, paused, and then said, my 18th birthday. Is it your current man? Yes. Are you sexually apathetic? Yes. When did it start? I don't know. When did you find it? Last month. After discovering sexual apathy, have you had sex? Yes, how many times? Yu Lily thought carefully and said, 3. 4 times? Be sure. 4 times. Have you had orgasms? Once, only once? Yes. Do you feel uncomfortable when you have sex? You asked. Do you feel? Do you feel? What? What? Why? Yu Lily paused and shook her head. I don't know. Everything has a reason, and there is a cause and effect. Luo Ran held an hourglass in his hand and spun it quickly. He asked casually, think about it. Why do you feel disgusted? Time, but Lily, and had you had time? Zhen, you. Luo Ran asked her. He put down the hourglass and took out a pocket watch as if by magic. After popping the cover of the pocket watch, he looked at her calmly. When was the last time you had an orgasm? You, Lu. Li at. Luo Yu. And said. Yu Lily Luo Yen. And looked at Li, and said. And said. Chapter 928. When Yu Lily heard that, she answered honestly, I broke up with Oh Ming more than 4 years ago. You haven't had a boyfriend in 4 years? No. Don't you think it's a little unfair? I only had one man. Luo Ran laughed with a teasing look in his eyes. Yu Lily looked up at him and asked, why would it be unfair? Wouldn't it be unfair to go out and mess around? Luo Ran heard such an answer and laughed out loud. Don't you want to try other men? Brother, don't poach me, okay? Be professional, okay? Luo Zhan's voice came in with a warning. Obviously, he was threatened by Oh Ming. Yu Lily heard it and laughed out loud. Luo Ran stopped flirting and coughed softly. To be honest, I'm a psychology major, but I'm not an expert in this area. However, I happen to have a classmate from the capital. Why don't I ask my friend to take a look at you? Friend? Yu Lily blinked and nodded. As Luo Ran spoke, he had already picked up the phone and called the legendary friend. Old Shen, there is a private job here. Do you want to take it? The other party is a great beauty. Okay, I'll wait for you. At my house. Well, I'll wait for you. Well, bye. Oh Ming looked at the movement inside from the outside and felt a little strange. He looked at Luo Zhan and asked, is your brother serious? Are you sure he is a professional? Hearing Oh Ming's doubt, Luo Zhan nodded seriously and said, my brother is an expert in his current hospital. There are many people who ask him to see them, but he specializes in things like autism in children. Anyway, he doesn't seem to have much to do with this. Hearing that, Oh Ming still had some doubts and looked at him. Luo Zhan shrugged and said, don't worry. If my brother says there is no problem, then there must be no problem. Oh Ming was skeptical. He looked inside thoughtfully and said, I hope so. About 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. As soon as he heard it, Luo Zhan knew it must be the expert. He hurried to open the door. As soon as he opened the door, he saw a pink dress. When the expert saw Luo Zhan, he smiled brightly and said, Hey, old classmate, we meet again. Luo Zhan was scared by his enthusiasm and quickly waved his hand. But before he spoke, he heard the expert say, But why is your taste getting worse and worse? You used to dress like this at home? Luo Zhan, a critical hit of 100,000 points. It's you? Oh Ming's voice was surprised. The man in the pink suit looked at Oh Ming and seemed to be a little happy. He said, Hey, why is my brother-in-law here? Did you want to watch today? But I heard that the other party is a great beauty. Oh Ming's face darkened. He looked at him and said, Your sister and I are not married yet. Don't call me that too early. Perhaps, he would just dump her. Shinjilia shook his head and said, That's not interesting. When your father asked our family for help, that's not what he said. He said that he would agree to any condition. You're already engaged to my sister. How can you run away now? Ming, Shen said. Shen, how, t what? Shen, you, Shen, t. Chapter 929. That's my brother. Luo Ran yawned and said, Come on, the patient is inside. Yu Lily clearly heard the movement outside, especially when she heard Shinjilia call Oh Ming brother-in-law. She had already guessed a little. Then, the sound of leather shoes came from behind, and the footsteps were different from Oh Ming's. Obviously, it was the expert who had just come. When Shinjilia saw Yu Lily, he was both expected and surprised. When he saw Oh Ming, Shinjilia had already guessed that the patient was likely to be Yu Lily. But after all, he was good at solving psychological problems between men and women. Did Yu Lily have psychological problems? Tut. Shinjilia walked over, looked at Yu Lily, and raised his eyebrows with a smile. It's a small world, miss you. I didn't expect that we are not only neighbors, but also friends of each other's friends. The world is really small. Yu Lily felt a little guilty about Shinjilia. After all, when she was in the capital, she cheated him of a lot of money. Although Shinjilia didn't seem to want to retaliate, what if? Hearing his words, Yu Lily felt even more guilty. She stood up, looked at Luo Ran, and asked, Is this the expert you mentioned? Yes. Luo Ran nodded. Although he is young, he is a psychopath. Now he has graduated from the master's degree in psychology and is studying for a doctorate, right? Shinjilia nodded, looked at Yu Lily, and said with great interest, Miss Yu, if you doubt me, you can go to Jinghua University in the capital to check my information. You are welcome to verify my identity. This is my business card. Yu Lily took it and glanced at it. It seems that he can really bluff people, but before you verify my identity, Luo Ran, can you briefly tell me about this lady's condition? Shinjilia looked at Luo Ran. Luo Ran played with a pocket watch in his hand, leaned on the table, and briefly explained what he had just asked Yu Lily. Yu Lily always felt that Shinjilia was a little unreliable. After all, people who could be deceived by bartenders were not very smart. What's more, Yu Lily felt that this man was shameless enough to chase after a girl. Most importantly, he was her neighbor and Shinmanting's younger brother. In case he wanted to do something to her, it would be too convenient. Yu Lily didn't like this feeling. She looked at Shinjilia and Luo Ran, stood up, and said, Why don't I go to the hospital on Monday? At most, I can take a day off. I still think it's too troublesome. It was obvious that she didn't want Shinjilia to see it. Yu Lily's intentions made Luo Ran feel a little embarrassed. After all, Shinjilia was called over by Luo Ran. Wasn't it obvious that he wasn't giving Luo Ran any face? He shrugged and said, It doesn't matter. Anyway, I have a lecture at Kingstown Psychology University on Monday. If you are interested, you can come and listen. Sit down. Oh Ming walked in and pressed Yu Lily down. He said, although this guy doesn't look very reliable, he is still a professional person. I don't think he will mess around. Isn't that right, Julia? Chapter 9:30. Yu Lily was a little hesitant, but when she looked up and saw Oh Ming's expression, she still sat down. Shinjilia saw that she finally cooperated. After driving all the people away, he looked at Yu Lily. Yu Lily found that they might have occupational diseases. Luo Ran liked to play with a pocket watch, while Shinjilia played with a lighter. Shinjilia even put his legs on the table, and his shoes slanted toward Yu Lily, which made her feel a little uncomfortable. Is this guy really reliable? Yu Lily was very doubtful. Shinjilia leaned back in the chair and asked, I heard that after you found out that you were frigid, you had an orgasm? Yu Lily didn't know why, but when it came from Luo Ran's mouth, she didn't feel anything. But when it came from Shinjilia, she felt that it was a little erotic and a little dirty. When Shinjilia saw Yu Lily's expression, he knew that she had a psychological barrier with him. He chuckled and said, Don't think of me as Shinjilia. Just think of me as an ordinary doctor. Answer me. After thinking about it, Yu Lily nodded and said, Yes. Under what circumstances did you have it? Last time, after Oh Ming was drunk, damn, he could still do it when he was drunk. I'm convinced. Shinjilia threw the lighter from one hand to the other, raised his eyebrows, and said, Under what circumstances? For example, did he say anything or make you feel very comfortable? Make you feel very comfortable. Yu Lily always felt that Shinjilia wanted to hit on her. Although it might be wishful thinking, facing a man of such identity, Yu Lily still felt very embarrassed. Really, very embarrassed. Shinjilia laughed and waved his hand. Okay, let's change the way. Yu Lily looked at him. Shinjilia took out a handkerchief from the left pocket of his chest. It was a beautiful checkered handkerchief with a faint smell of perfume. Shinjilia folded the handkerchief in front of her and said, This is a handkerchief. I will use it to cover your eyes. From now on, you can't see me. So, don't feel embarrassed or shy because you know me. I'm a doctor, that's all. Yu Lily nodded. Then, Shinjilia walked over and covered her eyes with the handkerchief. Now, answer my question just now. Under what circumstances did you have your last orgasm? Did your boyfriend say something that moved you or did something that made you feel comfortable? Yu Lily quickly replied, He confessed to me. What did he say? He said he loved me very much. That was the first time he said something like that to me. He was drunk at the time, so it must be true. Do you believe in the truth after drinking? Trust me. Then why did you come to see a doctor now? Could it be that you can't do it after that time? Yu Lily was silent for a moment and said, After that time, I had my period, so I didn't do it for a few days. Last night. We had a party at the company, and I drank a little too much. After I came back and took a shower, he wanted to. But I vomited. Were you drunk last night? Chapter 9:31. Do you hate that kind of feeling? Do you feel very stressed? Yes. Why? Shinjilia looked at her and asked. Yu Lily was silent and did not answer. Shinjilia took the opportunity to ask, Everything has a cause and effect. You have been with him for so many years. If you really hate him, you won't be with him, right? Yu Lily still did not speak. Shinjilia walked slowly behind Yu Lily and asked softly, Do you love him? Yes. Without hesitation. When Oh Ming, who was outside, heard these words, his heart swayed, and he immediately felt refreshed. She loved him. But why do you hate him? Shinjilia removed the handkerchief from her face and sat on the edge of the table. He looked at her and said, You don't like his touch. There must be a reason for that. But why is that? The reason, it should be because I heard that his wedding was coming the night before yesterday. But can I say it? Tell them that I planted a monitoring virus in Enchanting's mobile phone? That's why I know all this. Can I say it like that? Obviously, I can't. Lily opened her mouth, but in the end, she did not say a word. Shinjilia saw her hesitation. Then, he stood up, walked to the back of the table, and said, "It doesn't matter. Everyone has secrets. It doesn't matter if you don't tell me." While speaking, Shinjilia turned on the lighter in his hand and clicked it. Immediately, a blue flame jumped out. Lily looked at the lighter and was fascinated by the blue flame. What a beautiful flame. It was the first time that Lily had seen a flame that was all blue. Shinjilia waved the lighter in his hand and said with a smile, "It's just like how you used to cheat people in the capital. I didn't blame you for that, did I?" Lily felt guilty and coughed slightly, but her eyes couldn't help but look at the lighter in Shinjilia's hand. The blue flame jumped on his fingertips, and when it swept across the air, it seemed to be ignited in the air. Gorgeous and blurred, so beautiful. Shinjilia's eyes seemed to be filled with the same misty blue flame. He looked at her and smiled. She saw him toss the lighter in his hand and ask, "Do you like it?" Lily looked at the blue flame, her eyes a little empty, and nodded. "I like it. I'll let you play with it. Come, catch." Shinjilia threw the lighter in his hand. When Lily saw the blue flame flying toward her, she subconsciously stretched out her hands and caught the lighter in her palms. Beautiful. Moreover, it wasn't hot at all. Shinjilia stepped forward and said in a seductive voice, "Go and touch the fire." "Is it very comfortable?" "Yes." "It's cold, right?" "Yes." Lily's eyes became more and more empty. She looked at the blue flame that was jumping in front of her, and her eyes were full of fascination. Luo Zhan, Luo Ran, and O Ming were standing outside. They all saw Lily raise her hand and hold a piece of nothingness. There was nothing. However, she still had a stunned and intoxicated look on her face, which made them feel a little strange. It was obvious that Lily had been hypnotized. Chapter 932. They spoke in a low voice, and the people inside did not hear them. Shinjilia held the lighter in his hand, looked at her, and said with a charming voice, "In this flame, you see your favorite person." "Who is it?" "Oh Ming." "Yes, he's looking at you from inside. He's smiling at you. He's walking towards you." Lily smiled and looked ahead, but her eyes were a little empty. Oh Ming, who was in front of her, walked toward her. He was tall and slender in a burgundy straight suit. With a smile in his beautiful eyes, he walked towards her and bent down. She didn't realize that the person standing in front of her was Shinjilia. Lily reached out to the person in front of her and whispered, "Hold me." Oh Ming saw Lily like this, and he felt very uncomfortable. He was about to go in, but he was stopped by Luo Ran. "Don't worry, he is a doctor. Let's go outside." Luo Zhan also agreed. Looking at O Ming, Luo Zhan was really afraid that he would suddenly rush in, so he said, "Yes, O Ming, let's go outside and wait. If you suddenly rush in and do something in this hypnosis, maybe your woman will go crazy." It was a little exaggerated to make her crazy, but O Ming couldn't gamble with Lily. Looking at the situation inside, O Ming nodded and followed Luo Zhan, and Luo ran out. Shinjilia clearly noticed that they had left, so he was more relaxed. He reached out to Lily and said, "I am O Ming." "Yes, O Ming." Lily put her hands around his waist and looked up at him. "What are you most afraid of?" Shinjilia gently stroked her face with his palm. Lily pouted, and her eyes immediately turned red. She said, "You scolded me." "What did I scold you for?" "You scolded me for being a bitch, for being a prostitute, Lily's voice was filled with tears. She held Shinjilia's waist, but soon she looked up and pushed him away. Shinjilia's eyes suddenly darkened, and he took 2 steps back. He tentatively said, "Bitch, are you a prostitute again?" The face in front of her, which was a little blurred, suddenly became clear. It's him, it's Oh Ming. When Yu Lily heard that, she felt even more wronged. She cried out, I didn't. Is it painful? What was the most painful thing I've ever done to you? What was it? Do you still remember? Shinjilia looked at her. I once made you suffer even more. Have you forgotten? Yu Lily felt her mind was in chaos, and her head was aching. When Shinjilia saw this, he seized the opportunity to ask, I did something very overboard to you. I made you feel so much pain that you wanted to die. What was that about? Yu Lily frowned and felt a headache. She shook her head and shouted, I don't know. You knew, but you didn't want to remember it. You purposely forgot about it. In order to stay by his side, you selectively lost your memory during this painful moment. This was the main reason why she was mentally ill. Shinjilia had already found out that she had indeed lost a portion of her memory. This memory caused her great pain. But, what was going on? Yu Lily's head felt like it had been run over by a big truck. It seemed that it was about to explode. Was there such a thing? Chapter 933. My head hurts. Yu Lily stopped crying, and her mood was even calmer than before. She sat on the chair with her head in her hands and stared at the front. Shinjilia looked at her and was about to say something, but Yu Lily lowered her eyes and said, My head hurts. Don't think about the headache. Go to sleep. From now on, close your eyes and have a good sleep. Shinjilia's voice was charming as he whispered, Go to sleep. Yu Lily's eyelids became heavier, and soon she closed her eyes. Shinjilia held onto her and carried her in his arms as he walked out. The three men outside all looked over. When Oh Ming saw this scene, his face suddenly changed. He walked forward with a sullen face and took her back with both hands. Shinjilia looked at him with mixed feelings and asked, Have you forgotten that you are engaged to my sister? Oh Ming held Yu Lily and said, You don't need to worry. Well, now Miss Yu is also my patient. How can I not worry? Shinjilia glanced at Yu Lily and said, Luo Ran, do you have a guest room here? Let Miss Yu rest. I have a few words to say to my future brother-in-law about the patient's condition. No need. Oh Ming's face was sullen. If you have anything to say, go to my place and say it. I'll take her back. Shinjilia nodded slightly and said, Okay. Oh Ming looked at Shinjilia, and Shinjilia looked back at Oh Ming. However, the expressions of both of them looked very unfriendly, as if there was gunpowder flying in the air. The inexplicable smell of gunpowder made Luo Zhan and Luo Ran a little confused. Oh Ming walked out with Shinjilia with Yu Lily in his arms. When they returned to the apartment, Oh Ming put Yu Lily back in the room. When they went out, Shinjilia took a bottle of Coke for himself. Seeing Oh Ming come out, Shinjilia raised the Coke in his hand and said, Take it yourself. Do you mind? Oh Ming glanced at him and sat on the sofa. What do you want to say to me? She has a memory, but it's gone. Oh Ming was stunned and looked at him. How did you know? I tested it out. Shinjilia took a sip of Coke and looked at Oh Ming with contempt in his eyes. I don't know what this memory is, but you must know, right? Oh Ming frowned. The first thing that came to mind was that night in the bar. He wasn't sure if this was the lost memory, but it was very likely. After all, according to Yu Lily's character, he thought that it would take a lot of effort to get her back with him, but Oh Ming was still brooding over it, but he also hoped to get lucky. It was very likely that it was this part. If it was true, Oh Ming hoped that she would never think about it again. He was afraid. What if she remembered and didn't want him anymore? When Shinjilia saw that Oh Ming didn't speak, he was even more certain that Oh Ming knew. He sneered and said, It's okay if you don't want to say it. Anyway, it's not my woman who is frigid. I can't wait for you to break up with this woman and marry my sister. My sister really likes you. Oh Ming lit a cigarette, sat on the sofa with his legs crossed, and frowned. Do you think it's interesting to do this? Chapter 934. Shinjilia's tone was a little impatient. He looked at Oh Ming and said, "You can marry whoever you like. Why do you keep my sister from getting married and keep a mistress to make love? Is it interesting?" Oh Ming took a drag on the cigarette and leaned on the sofa with mixed feelings. Xiao Ziqing was his mother. He couldn't let her die. However, Yu Lily was the woman he loved deeply. How could he give her up? He didn't want to lose either of them. Oh Ming still didn't speak. Shinjilia snorted and said, "Scumbag. If there's nothing else, you can go back. Don't take up space here." Oh Ming put out the cigarette and unceremoniously asked him to leave. Shinjilia shook his head and said, "Are you angry? Why don't you tell me what memory that woman lost? I can help you cure it. Most women's coldness is due to psychological reasons. Now you don't even want to tell me the cause. How can I help you? I don't need you. I will take her to the hospital. Get out." Oh Ming stood up. He pointed to the door and said, "Close the door when you go out." Shinjilia sneered, stood up, and left. Yu Lily slept very deeply. There were all kinds of nightmares in her mind. It was as if she was a small boat in the middle of a vast ocean. Endless drifting and endless confusion. A seagull came and perched on the boat and spent many, many happy hours with her. It told her many things that she had never seen. However, a seagull was a seagull. It had its own home, its own partner, its own sky, its own sea. And she was just a small boat from beginning to end. A small boat with no background and no support. When she opened her eyes, Yu Lily's eyes hurt a little. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. The surrounding light was a little dim. It was evening. Yu Lily got up and walked out of the living room. There was no one in the living room. Oh Ming was not there. After washing, Yu Lily felt a little hungry. She picked up the phone and called Oh Ming, but the phone rang for a long time, and no one answered. Yu Lily used the phone to order takeout. She was bored and lay on the bed with the phone. Yu Lily picked up the phone and turned on the monitoring system in Enchanting's phone. She put on the headphones. There seemed to be people eating on the other side. There was the sound of cutlery colliding with porcelain plates, and there was the sound of people talking. "Eat more. I cooked this myself. Don't you like it the most?" "Thank you, Mom," Oh Ming said. Oh, so he didn't lie to her the last few times. He really was at his mother's place. However, that woman was also there. She had misunderstood. However, knowing that he wasn't lying to her, Yu Lily's mood didn't improve. Instead, it became even heavier. Looking out the window at the gloomy sky, Yu Lily felt as if a stone was weighing on her heart. It was so uncomfortable. He felt like crying. However, it also seemed very pretentious. Yu Lily let out a long sigh and went to the bathroom to wash her face. Before she could wipe her face clean, she heard the doorbell ring. The takeout must have arrived. She casually wiped her face and went to open the door. Sure enough, it was a takeaway, but at the same time, there was an uninvited guest. Chapter 935. When Yu Lily saw him, she was shocked. After taking the takeout, she was about to close the door. But Shinjilia didn't look at her at all. He just closed the door and said with a smile, "What did you order?" "I haven't eaten yet. Let's eat together." Yu Lily glared at him and said, "I ordered very little. I don't have enough for myself." "It doesn't matter. I saw that there is bread in your refrigerator. I will eat bread." Yu Lily was speechless. How could there be such a shameless person in the world? The delivery man was dumbfounded, but Shinjilia quickly pushed the door open and squeezed his way in. "Oh, why don't you even turn on the light? It's so dark." Shinjilia found the switch and turned on the light in the living room. Then he went straight to the refrigerator and took out a bottle of Coke. Why are you looking at me? Sit down. Yu Lily stood and looked at him. She almost collapsed and shouted, Is this your home or mine? Everyone is a family. Now my brother-in-law and my sister are going to the O family to talk about the wedding. Sooner or later, you will have to call me brother. Shinjilia took a sip of his soda. The words that came out of his mouth sounded as if they were nothing out of the ordinary. Yu Lily suddenly felt suffocated. The sadness and discomfort that she had suppressed suddenly came up. This guy, he was here to hurt her on purpose, wasn't he? Yu Lily sneered and threw the takeout on the table. She shouted, Don't you want to remind me that I am a mistress and a mistress? I know it now. Can you get out? Shinjilia stopped drinking and looked at her. Yu Lily's little face was stiff, with a touch of stubbornness. Her eyes were red, and it could be seen that she was trying not to cry. It's really cute. Shinjilia slightly raised his eyebrows and shrugged. I didn't. I'm just telling the truth. Tut, I thought you didn't care. You live in another man's house, either for money or for sex. You see, you are frigid. It's definitely not for sex, but for money, right? Shinjilia's words were too straightforward. It was so straightforward that Yu Lily's expression changed. She stomped her foot and roared, Get lost. Shinjilia was yelled at. He blinked and looked behind Yu Lily. With a look of surprise, he said, Hey, why are you back so early? Yu Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she looked back. However, there was no one. When she looked back, Shinjilia had already taken out a lighter. With a light flick, a blue flame danced on it. With just one look, Yu Lily couldn't help but be captivated. So beautiful. Is it beautiful? Shinjilia's lips curled up as he quickly twirled the lighter in his hand. Yu Lily looked at him, but she quickly regained her composure. She tilted her head to look at him and roared, Not beautiful. Get out of here. Shinjilia was slightly surprised. He looked at her and laughed. My goodness, your mental strength is quite strong. If you were in a martial arts novel, you would definitely be like Xiao Longnu. Yu Lily, was he praising her or insulting her? Chapter 936. Yu Lily stomped over and said, I can't eat if you're here. Well, then you can only lose weight. I won't leave. I'm going to wait here for O Ming to come back. O Ming is not here. You go back first and come back later. No, how can I do that? Shinjilia looked at Yu Lily's takeout and said, What did you order? Can I see it? No. Yu Lily put away the takeout and stared at him. Oh, it's fried chicken? Shinjilia glanced at it and said with a smile, How can you eat fried chicken without beer? Wait a minute, I'll get it. When Yu Lily heard that, she consciously stepped aside so that he could see the door outside. But soon, Shinjilia sat down again and said, No, I can't come in later. Coke is also good. With a look of reluctance, he reached out to Yu Lily and said, Take it out and eat it. I promise you can't finish it alone. Come on. Yu Lily snorted and reluctantly took out the fried chicken and put it on the coffee table. The coffee table in front of her was a little low. Yu Lily leaned over and opened the package, only to find a bottle of beer inside. As soon as the package was opened, a delicious smell came out. It was a big chicken, and Yu Lily really couldn't finish it. She gave a glove to Shinjilia, and he took it without hesitation. Looking at the only bottle of beer, he said, Is there a cup? I want to drink beer. Yu Lily rolled her eyes at him and took out a disposable paper cup from a small cabinet under the coffee table. After pouring a cup for herself, she gave the rest to Shinjilia. Shinjilia accepted it and took a sip. His smile was full of satisfaction. That's great. Yu Lily twisted a chicken leg for herself and ate it with satisfaction. She said, Finish it quickly. If O Ming sees it, he will scold me. What the hell, he won't give me fried chicken? He said it's junk food and can't be eaten, Lily said with a look of disgust as she ate. Gee, why is this person so annoying? Shinjilia glanced at Lily but quickly looked away. He lowered his head to eat and asked, how did you find this family? It's so delicious. I want to order it next time. I just ordered it casually. Lily was full after eating a few pieces of chicken. She drank the rest of the beer, pushed the fried chicken box and said, the rest is all yours. I'm full. Shinjilia was dumbfounded. You eat so little? Scram after you finish eating. You're too heartless. I'm still eating. Can't you be a little gentler? Lily ignored him and looked down at her phone. Shinjilia looked at her. After filling his stomach, he took out a necklace. Lily caught a glimpse of him taking something out of the corner of her eye. She instinctively looked over. When she saw the item in Shinjilia's hand, her attention was immediately drawn to it. Shinjilia shook the necklace and said, look at this necklace. I saw it. What do you want? Do you like it? When Lily heard this question, she knew that this guy was likely to set a trap for her again. She pouted and looked away, but when she turned her head, she seemed to see a flash of light in front of her. Chapter 937. Beautiful. Lily stared at the flame and felt a little dazed. Do you like it? I like it. Can I give it to you? Shinjilia looked at her with a smile in his round eyes. When he smiled, his eyes became a beautiful crescent. This is all yours in the future. Take it. He threw the lighter forward, but he didn't throw it out. Lily felt that she had caught the lighter. Her fingers passed through the blue flame and she couldn't put it down. Lily, Shinjilia called her and whispered, do you know who I am? Lily heard the words and looked up, a little dazed. I am O Ming. Shinjilia looked at her and imitated O Ming. He smiled wickedly and raised his eyebrows slightly. What? Lily looked at him, and the expression on her face was obviously relaxed. You are back. Yes, I am back. Do you remember what happened some time ago? What happened? Lily looked at him blankly. That is, the last time you were in pain, we seemed to have quarreled, right? Shinjilia said patiently, after quarreling, we were separated for 4 years. After 4 years, we met for the first time. What was the situation? Lily was unconscious, and her thoughts were pulled back to the past. After a pause, Lily replied, your driver hit me with his car and broke my boss's computer. What about the second time? You paid for the computer, went to my apartment, and read my diary. Shinjilia frowned when he heard what happened. After Lily's voice fell, Shinjilia asked again, what about the third time? In the hospital. I tried to commit suicide, but you saved me. You carried me away in the hospital and refused to let me die. What happened later? I wanted to jump into a river and a building, but you didn't let me die. In the end, I figured it out. I don't want to die. I want to be with you. Shinjilia caught the point and asked, why did you want to commit suicide again and again? Because I didn't want to live, Lily answered honestly. Why didn't you want to live? I did something terrible to you, didn't I? But you've forgotten. Think about it, what have I done to you? Shinjilia deliberately lowered his voice and mimicked O Ming's. He raised his voice slightly and said, think about it, you. The familiar form of address made Lily's brows knit together. My head hurts. Shinjilia knew how difficult it was for her. Maybe it hadn't happened for a long time, but it had caused irreparable damage to her. This was the most fundamental reason for her frigidity, and also, the reason why O Ming didn't want to tell him, or the reason why he was afraid to tell him. Maybe this reason could make her leave him. In this way, O Ming could truly let go of this woman and marry Enchanting, right? Why did he do that? Lily frowned, and her mind was full of annoyance and noise that was difficult to get rid of. O Ming had done something outrageous to her. What was it? Why is that? My head hurts, I can't remember. Lily held her head and suddenly looked up. She saw a faint blue light flashing in front of her. There seemed to be a flash of light in her mind. Lily was a little confused and tentatively asked, "Birthday?" Chapter 938. Cake. Lily spat out a word again. In her mind, there was a shoe swaying in front of her, and on it, there was a white cake. Lick it clean. Oh Ming's voice seemed to ring in her mind. Shinjilia saw the change of her expression, held the lighter in his hand, and quietly walked over. Lily stared at the faint blue flame, and it seemed that she was surrounded by a nightclub with bright lights. Men and women were dancing enthusiastically, and there were beautiful hostesses around looking at her and laughing at her. Countless pairs of eyes were staring at her with contempt, ridicule, and sympathy, as if they were saying, "Lick it clean, lick it clean, lick it clean." Lily stood there and wanted to escape, but there was another person behind her. Humiliation and despair. Lily had never been in such an unbearable situation. However, the scene that made her feel even more unbearable was yet to come. That man, the man whom she loved deeply, the man whom she loved dearly, had given her the most unbearable and embarrassing situation. Some people around picked up their mobile phones to record videos, but there was a man on her body. In front of so many people, in front of everyone, Ming bowed his head and smiled, full of evil. His pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes were full of ambiguity and revenge, and he whispered, "You are here." Lily suddenly stood up and screamed, "No, no, Ming, you bitch, bastard. I quit. Do you really think that I can't live without you? Shameless and self-righteous." As she spoke, she punched Ming in front of her, almost using all her strength, so hard, so mercilessly. Shinjilia did not say a word, stretched out his hands, and let her hit his palms. It was not painful, but it was definitely not easy. "Why do you do this to me? This behavior is no different from raping me in public," Lily cried and punched the man in front of her, but soon her hands were held. Lily could not break free, and tears fell down. She cried, "Why do you force me? I have obviously forgotten, why do you force me to remember?" Shinjilia held her hands, looked at her with a pair of eyes, and said, "What did I do to you in public? Birthday? Cake? And then?" She remembered, but didn't say anything. Shinjilia looked at her and whispered seductively, "What did I do to you? Will you tell me?" Lily couldn't say a word. She threw herself at him and hit him hard in the chest. B*TCH, B*TCH, B*TCH. Shinjilia groaned. He held her hand and took a step back. At the same time, he felt that he had been scolded unjustly. But then he saw Lily's eyes staring at him. Or, he was staring at Ming. Shinjilia's hair stood on end when she glared at him like that. It was hatred. Shinjilia had never seen such hatred before. Didn't Lily love him? Why was there such hatred? Just as Shinjilia was looking at her and wondering what was going on, Lily suddenly rushed toward him. She lifted her legs and jumped up, wrapping her arms around his neck. Chapter 939. Shinjilia screamed and wanted to push her away, but Lily's hands and feet clung to him tightly. The strength of biting his neck was as if she wanted to bite a piece of flesh off his body. It was so hard and so cruel. Shinjilia gasped in pain and shouted, "Lily, are you King sick?" However, these words stimulated Lily's anger and hatred, and she bit harder. Shinjilia's hands pinched under her armpits, and Lily's arms suddenly became sore and weak, and she loosened them. Taking the opportunity to throw her on the sofa, Shinjilia gasped and reached out to wipe his hand, which was full of red. After being thrown like this, Lily came back to herself. Looking at the man in front of her, Lily felt a little dizzy. Looking at the man in front of her, she found that the man was Shinjilia? Shinjilia looked at her and covered his neck with his hand. His face was pale with pain, and he said innocently, "It's just a meal of fried chicken. Do you have to be so cruel?" Then he looked at Yu Lily with an aggrieved look and spread out his palm, saying, "Look, it's red." Yu Lily wiped her face, and her hands were wet. Tears, and the red on the corner of her mouth. Shinjilia looked at her dumbfounded expression and asked, "Did you remember something just now?" Remembered something. Yu Lily couldn't remember when she had forgotten about it, but just now, she suddenly remembered it, and she had lost all her dignity. That night, he treated me like that. How could I forget? Such a great humiliation. Yu Lily was like a dog, humiliated by him and ridiculed by everyone. Why did Yu Lily remember that she committed suicide, remembered that she was bullied, and remembered why she wanted to die and why she didn't want to live, but why couldn't she remember why she continued to stay with Oh Ming? Why? What reason did she have to stay with this man? Wasn't the reason why she left because of her identity? She thought she still had the self-righteous dignity, but she didn't know that her so-called dignity had been destroyed by Oh Ming that night. Wiping away her tears, Yu Lily stood up and was about to speak when she heard the door open. When Oh Ming walked in and saw Shinjilia at home, he was stunned for a moment. Then, his face suddenly darkened. Oh Ming looked at Shinjilia with an indescribable sense of depression and asked, "Why are you here?" Shinjilia clutched his neck. When he turned to look at Oh Ming, he felt a little wronged. When Yu Lily saw Oh Ming, her face also darkened. Her eyes fell on Shinjilia, and her voice was indescribably gentle as she said, "You go back first." When Shinjilia heard Yu Lily's voice, he immediately felt a chill run down his spine. Things are not looking good. Sure enough, Oh Ming's face became more and more unsightly. It was as if he had swallowed a landmine. It was extremely dangerous. Just as Shinjilia was about to walk out with his head lowered, Oh Ming pulled him back with one hand. Shinjilia wasn't prepared at all. When Oh Ming tugged at him, his hand immediately loosened. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.